to lesson 3. Now we're going to learn some more about pawns. As you already know, pawns do a lot of things differently than other pieces. So there is a lot to learn about them. And the big new thing we're learning in this lesson is about en passant. That's a French word, which basically means you're capturing while moving, which is very unusual. And let me demonstrate that. We already know that the pawns, only when they start out in their initial positions, can choose to move up 1 or 2 squares. So, when the white pawn chooses to move up not 1, but 2 squares, which each of the pawns can only do from their initial position once in a game, right? So each of the pawns, this one, this one, this one, this one, right? So they each have that option. So this pawn could move here, this pawn could move here. Of course, this pawn at the moment cannot, while a black pawn is there, right? So let's suppose the e pawn moves up to e4 for white. Now, black has this very special opportunity that's called en passant, when a pawn can move behind the e4 pawn and take it off, right? Normally, that's not how we capture. However, there is this special situation that sometimes arises during a chess game. Also, by the way, when the pawn moved up to e4, the other pawn, the f pawn, can also do the same en passant. Or, had white played with a c pawn to c4, since there is a pawn on one side of it, or if there would be a b4, could do the same. But for now, the d pawn can move behind it and capture it. Okay, I know that a lot of beginner players don't yet play with en passant, but I want you to be aware of it, not to be shocked when one of the other opponents you play will know it and tries to do it, and I don't want you to argue with him or her that there isn't such a move. Yes, there is, but in the beginning you can choose to play with the en passant rule or without. So that's the most important thing to learn about en passant. And now please check out the rest of the chapter with the digital content. And now let me introduce to you some cool pawn tricks. As we already know, generally the pawn's aim is to get all the way across and get promoted to a more valuable piece, which typically is a queen. However, in order to create a passed pawn, as we call it, we have to make sure there is no enemy pawn in its way, and neither is there an enemy pawn on either side of it that would capture our pawn. Unless, of course, if we have support from one of our other pawns. So in this case, white is able to create a passed pawn by advancing to f5. Black, for example, plays c6 and now f6. Now this is where it's really important that we do have a pawn on e5 that's highlighted with green. So after black captures our pawn, we are able to recapture, right? And then our pawn will be first to get across the board and promote to a queen. Let's look at the next example, where you will learn about something new that's called breakthrough. So again, remember, our target in this pawn wars is to get any one of our pawns across, and that means we win the game, right? This is a mini game, the pawn war. So it doesn't matter if we lose a pawn or two along the way, as long as one of our pawns gets across before our opponent does. So here we'll see one of those examples where white sacrifices one pawn in order for the d pawn to get across. So c6, now the pawn is aiming to either capture the black pawn on d7 or just simply move forward to get promoted. And after black captures our pawn, the path of the d pawn is clear and it will promote very quickly. And now let's see a much trickier version of this same idea, when we don't mind losing a pawn or two, as long as the third one will get across to promote. So this is a very famous chess puzzle that happens actually a lot also in real chess games. So, as we said, we don't care which pawn gets across as long as one of them does. So you can try to figure this out, play around with it, and see if you can succeed. So white can try to push any of the 3 pawns, but only one of them really works. So let's try pushing the c pawn. Here, unfortunately, black can capture our pawn and then push the a pawn, and now none of the pawns can move, so we're having a tie, we're having a draw. Going back to the beginning, if you try to push the other pawn, black has an option to do the same, capture, capture, and c6, or even can push through and then capture with the c pawn, and again, white cannot make any move, cannot make progress. So that leaves us with the only correct choice, and that is to push the middle pawn. Okay, so now black has choices, whether capture with the a7 pawn or the c7 pawn. Otherwise, white will capture one of those black pawns and being just 1 rank away from promoting. So, if the c pawn captures, we sacrifice 1 more pawn by playing a6. Now, if b pawn takes to c5, we capture the b7 pawn and white arrived first. Of course, the pawn doesn't remain a pawn, it will become another piece, most likely a queen. If after a6, black rather captures on a6, then we advance our c pawn, and as we can see, the white pawn arrives much quicker than its black counterpart. Finally, after b6, if black chooses to take with the a7 pawn, then we're giving up our c pawn next, threatening to capture the pawn on b7, and if b takes c6, we're advancing the a pawn, and again, white arrived first. So, hopefully these will give you some good ideas in your future pawn wars. And now, let me introduce to you something completely different. Something called the en passant. And that's a very special rule, only applies to pawns. In fact, it's a pretty tricky rule, so initially, maybe for the next couple of weeks, I suggest you perhaps practice chess without it, because it's quite complicated. But let me tell you about it anyway, so you just have it in the back of your mind, so you're familiar with all the different rules when it comes to pawns. It's a special situation when a pawn uses its special privilege to move 2 squares up instead of the normal 1 at a time. So when the pawn moves in this position to d5, and you do have a pawn on either side of the opposite color, that pawn can capture like this, taking off the black pawn off the board, just as if the pawn would have moved up only 1 square. And the other white pawn has that same opportunity as well. Of course, doing en passant is optional. You could also push a different pawn or move another piece later when you will play with all the pieces. But it's a special privilege that you only have at that very moment when your opponent moves the pawn up 2 squares. If you move one of your other pieces and you think about it, oh, let me do it on the following move, you cannot do that. Okay? So this is a once in a, not lifetime, but only at the moment when the pawn moves up 2 squares. Only then you can do it. Of course, if a different pawn moves up 2 squares, potentially you may have another opportunity on a different file. But when it comes to the black d pawn moving up, you can only do it on the very following move, if you happen to have a pawn on either side of the black pawn. Okay? And finally, let me point out that if black had a pawn on d6 and moved the pawn up only 1 square, then you do not have this option. Remember, so only if a pawn moved up 2 squares from its initial position, only then you have en passant. Pretty tricky, right? So it's up to you. You can try to play with the full game, but I don't mind if for the first few weeks you play without this special rule and then you go back to it and get ready for a full game. Have fun now that you know how to create a pass pawn and how to do a breakthrough so one of your pawns gets across quicker than your opponent. Thanks for listening.